Hello and welcome to the June edition of Mytech U, where today we are going to make IT easy. Well, actually, we're just going to talk about what makes IT easy, but hopefully that is our goal. And it seems like in the community and in the world today, the business owners and operators, what they really want is they want IT to just work. They want IT to be easy. So we're playing a little bit off of the everything as a service, as that is kind of a part of it, but don't be fooled. This is not just about turning everything into an OpEx or financing. That's not really what the conversation is. We're really going to talk about what are the components that make IT easy for your organization, and so what are some of the ways in which you can plug in. So a couple of housekeeping things. There is a control panel, so please, there's a question pane. There's also a chat pane if you'd like to interact throughout the session. We have Stephanie watching that today. And my name's Nathan Austin. I'll be leading the presentation today, but we're joined by Scott Robertstad, who's moderator today. So Scott, could you introduce yourself before we kick off?
Hello, everyone. My name is Scott Robertstad, like Nate said. I actually have been with Mytech about 5 weeks now as the sales manager here. I actually am the sales manager for the Denver location along with the Minneapolis location. Super excited to be here and interested to learn more about the challenges that you go through from a small business standpoint in IT.
All right, thanks, Scott. So with that said, by all means, again, with the control panel, Scott and Stephanie will be monitoring that, and as far as if you interject any questions so that we can interject. And if we don't get to those questions during the presentation, we will follow up with you afterwards. But thank you very much for being here, and we'll get started. So moving to what we're really going to be talking about today. Got a blank screen. That's what you should be seeing right now. And I think all of us in the past have seen something like this. Make it easy, right? Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about this. Forgive me, that's my mouse handwriting that I was able to kind of overwrite on this screenshot here. But so that's what we're going to try and do today. But in order to do that, I want to challenge everyone listening and watching in the future, listening today and watching in the future, that it's about thinking differently about IT. It's about thinking differently than the way when we traditionally bought equipment, because our companies and our organizations and our employees leverage IT differently today than they did 5 years ago, than they did 10 years ago, and so on. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I want to challenge you to think differently about it and open your mind to why some of these things work and how we can collaborate to make IT easy for your organization. So today we're really going to talk about, here are the key bullet points, why the cloud works. There's some confusion around what's this phenomenon? I mean, everyone says they want to go to the cloud, but why do people go to the cloud? Why do people want to, and what makes it really work? So we're going to talk about that today. Also thinking about how your business should think about leveraging the cloud differently, that it's not just a copy and paste from what you're doing today to what you can do in the cloud. There's some differences that you should be thinking about there. We're actually going to cover, the cloud is not the only part of your technology that needs to operate well. So we're going to talk about, we've identified the top 10 best practices for infrastructure, for things that are typically going to still be at your facility that your employees are going to use that you still need. We're going to talk about that, and we actually have that we can share with everyone who's attending. And finally, we're going to talk about just a little dialogue around the financial conflict that's basically that we're all being forced to deal with, because much of the IT world, and especially the cloud in particular, it's an operational expense. It's an OpEx. And but traditionally, a lot of people have been used to buying, a lot of organizations have been used to buying CapEx, spending it up front. So how do we prepare ourselves for that? Yes, Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, Nathan, one thing that I just think maybe you should touch on a little bit is specifically taking a look at the cloud. I mean, I hear it all the time. People are talking about the cloud. They're moving to the cloud. Everything's in the cloud. What is the actual cloud? Could you kind of explain maybe a little bit about that?
Scott, I'm not sure if you caught that question from the next slide or not, but thank you, because we are going to talk exactly that. What does the cloud mean? And why do you care? So, because I think that is important in order for us to all of us to be on the same page, because the cloud is a lot of different things. So if you ask 5 people, you might get 8 different answers, right? And I think sometimes it could be a noun. It's this cloud thing, but just like Google, well, Google is a noun and a verb, right? So what is it exactly? You know, and the different paradigm that we need to deal with, and this has been happening for a while and maturing and evolving for a while, but where it's really the business objectives, and oftentimes, not every organization, but there are many organizations where the leadership, because they don't understand it, they kind of keep it at an arm's length, where really we need to pull that a little closer, and we need to be thinking in terms of the business needs and objectives, and make sure that you get the right cloud, if cloud's even the right answer for you, or what part of the cloud makes sense. So we really need to have the business to drive what cloud means for you. And for the sake of this conversation today, and what we see most widely adopted in the small and medium business community and the nonprofit community that we work with, we're going to talk about kind of three components, and two of which are similar. Infrastructure as a service, so that's the IaaS that you'll see. And that's really saying, I've got this server, like the people are traditionally used to, a server that sits in their office, and basically taking that server and not physically moving it, but basically taking the function of that server and saying, I don't want to be responsible for the hardware anymore. I'm going to move that infrastructure. I'm going to take that service. I'm going to just make it a service, and I'm going to pay Microsoft or Google or Amazon or CenturyLink. I'm going to pay them to do that. So infrastructure as service is kind of taking that traditional server model, and you still have the server, you still have the applications on the server. It's just moved to a cloud environment instead of, or hosted environment instead of in your office. Then there's what people commonly call application as a service, and then software as a service. These are very similar, but think of it as, if you think about Salesforce.com, it's not an application you buy, you only subscribe to it. So you're not subscribing to a server and licensing and email and all that kind of stuff. You're just subscribing to, I just want Salesforce.com. Or for some of the nonprofit world, Razor's Edge, Blackbaud has a hosted model. Many in the medical world can subscribe to their an EMR program that's hosted, or some other line of business application that works for your organization. So for the sake of the conversation today, we're mainly going to be talking about infrastructure as a service, and then software and or application as a service that are oftentimes synonymously used. Scott, does that answer your question? You feel like that gave enough clarity for where we're at today?
It does. One of the questions that comes up for me is specifically regarding the cloud. We work with small businesses for providing managed services in IT. Can you give your experience as far as what verticals are maybe adopting the cloud quicker than others? Are there different adjacencies as far as medical, manufacturing? Are they at different levels of the spectrum, or can you maybe talk about your experience there as far as who's adopting the cloud quicker than other people?
Yeah, that's a great question. We actually see small business more widely going to the cloud because the once you get under 50 or 25 or 15 in that ballpark, the people, it's a lot easier to make everything you do part of the cloud. Once you start getting beyond the 25 or 50 person organization to 50 to 100, 100 and above, it really ends up getting more of a hybrid environment where you're going to have on-premise equipment and cloud equipment. So you're kind of leveraging both to meet your needs. So we're not necessarily seeing a significant particular vertical, if you say like industry or market, but we're seeing more it's driven oftentimes by the size of the organization. And then the other thing that's been driving it from what we've seen is whether or not the line of business application you use, whatever your organization uses, has a software as a service offering. For those organizations that leverage a company, their main line of business software that has a software as a service offering, like a electronic medical records, for example, we see those organizations adopting that or moving from an on-premise kind of environment for their application to a hosted environment, because it solves a lot of the problems. It makes a lot of the things that they do easier, and they can just focus on running their business. So I haven't seen it necessarily by vertical, but it's more around size of organization and in particular the line of business application that the organization may be using. So
thank you.
So yeah, no, thank you for the question. It's a good one. So here's one of the challenges I want to think. Again, there's a blank screen on purpose right now. So here's one of the challenges I want you to think about. So how many of you when you walk into a room and the room's dark, the lights aren't on, and the first thing you do is you look for your light switch and you hit the light switch. How many of you, when you hit that light switch, actually wonder and question, gosh, I hope it turns on. I wonder if the light's going to turn on. It probably hasn't crossed your mind for a long. Now, maybe if you're in the middle of a thunderstorm or something like that, you might question whether or not the power's on or not. But in general, you don't think about where whether or not that light switch is going to turn on or not, or where that light's going to turn on. When your heat kicks on in the winter, now if you haven't gotten your furnace updated or your furnace breakdown, you definitely might think about whether or not your heat kicks on. But you probably don't think about where the gas comes from and where it was mined and how it got to your house. You don't really care about those things. You just know that I want to go to the thermostat and I want to go, I'm feeling a little cold, I'm going to knock it up a couple degrees, and I want my heat to turn on so I feel warmer. You don't think about all the stuff in the background, usually. If anyone does, throw a question or a chat out there and maybe we can chat about that. And also, we're getting to the point where, when you get online, you're not really concerned like, well, gosh, where does my traffic go? Does it go, like if you're on Comcast, for example, your traffic routes through Chicago? Do you know that or do you care, right? You just want it to work. So one of the things that I want to challenge, and part of this whole concept, and that what we want to try and where we see the direction of IT moving is really, it's kind of IT as utility, right? It's kind of like this. Do I want to make sure that I'm running to the gas station to get gas and keeping a generator to make sure that my lights turn on and my IT works and my power works? No, you just have outlets in the wall and you plug into it. That's what we kind of expect. And that's actually where we're seeing the ability of the cloud to kind of deliver on that promise, is that we really just want our IT to work. We want to come into a room and flip on a switch from an IT perspective and just have it work. And do you really care? Like, so for example, do you care where Microsoft keeps their servers or what kind of servers they have or where they physically reside? Most people don't. So some people think about that, but most people don't. So that's one of the challenges I want you to think about as we go through today. So think about the cloud as from a utility perspective, and now we're going to get into, let's get a little more specific. So not all cloud providers are equal. One of the common questions we get is, well, how do I know, how do I know, all I see is a quote, or I see a bill that's for, a few $100s a month or a few $1,000s a month, that basically, and this my server's there. How do I know what I'm getting? Well, here's one of the challenges with IT, and one of the reasons why Mytech does not believe about building our own, because this could be your cloud provider. Just candidly, you don't necessarily know that this isn't what you're paying for. So when you pay that monthly bill, I don't know about you, but if a company I was paying a company to run my infrastructure, and it was hosted somewhere, and they were responsible for it, and it looked like this, I wouldn't feel very secure that they have the right redundancy and the right organization and the right systems in place to deliver on the promise of IT, which is we just want it to work, right? I don't want to have to think about these things. But I also want to trust that this isn't the kind of IT provider, or this isn't the kind of cloud that I'm paying for. You probably are thinking about, when you think of a cloud provider, it's like, I'd rather have something like this. I really want it to be neat, tidy, organized, temperature controlled, secured, well run, all these things, because really what you're trying to do is you're trying to go to that IT's utility when you pay for the cloud. I just want to take that electrical out, and I want to plug it in the wall, and I want it to work. So I can tell you, I would rather have this over an unorganized IT, and so you don't necessarily know what you're paying for. So this is what's leading to kind of what the cloud landscape looks like today. And I was just at a Microsoft training last week, and the instructor basically said, all the industry pundits and think tanks and market analysis people basically say there's going to be three major providers in the end. There's going to be Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. We're not there today. There's still other ones like IBM, and many people here in the Midwest, including Colorado, know CenturyLink is one of the providers we work with. So the two providers we primarily work with are CenturyLink and Microsoft. But I don't know about you. You probably heard of these companies, including IBM, and you probably recognize them because they have lots and lots and lots of money. And when these organizations build out a data center, they can spend way more money on redundancy and security and reliability and negotiate power contracts, negotiate internet agreements. They have more scale to be able to build all that into their systems than any small business or any nonprofit organization could ever think about investing. They invest way more money in this than we probably all do in annual revenue combined. So one of the things that the benefit and the beauty of this cloud landscape and understanding that component is I don't want to work with like Joe's Garage Hosting. Yeah, it might be cheap, but you get that other picture that you see that was disorganized. Let's leverage, we recommend and we believe that leveraging the scale that these organizations are building is really what we're talking about as far as leveraging the cloud and thinking about the scale that they can bring to the table. So does that make sense? That's one of the things that it helps, at least we've found from questions that we've had asked before, that kind of connects the dots of why, why should we look at, these larger organizations versus, someone down the street. Part of it is you don't know what you're getting, and these organizations have way more scale than pretty much anybody in the entire world. Okay, so here's one of the promises that you can get from that. So this is just using an example of Microsoft O365, and I included a little a link down here as far as where that came from. But Microsoft basically has a service level agreement through subscribing to their O365, and so this is the uptime, their availability, because again, you just want your IT to work. You want to be able to turn on your computer and open up your email or open up, Outlook or open up whatever application you're using, and you just want it to work. So Microsoft published their last, and I should update this slide because I think they've got their 2016 numbers out, their fiscal 2016. But they basically have 99.99, 95, 98, 99, 98 uptime, right? Which means just minutes a year of downtime that might impact your organization. So this is one of the promises of the cloud. And while any individual business that might be running any individual single server might actually achieve this, the probability of you achieving it is way more significant in the cloud because of the redundancy in the backend systems and scale that Microsoft's able to invest as an illustration. So this is one of the kind of the promises of the cloud when we think about what does the cloud mean, what is the promise of that as far as being able to be available, but then there's another one that people think of. Either they think of it because they want it or they think of it because they're concerned about it, and that's security. In particular, if you have any compliance requirements, any of these, for example, and there's way too many to even mention, but HIPAA and but there's other ones. There's FINRA and SEC compliance. There's ITAR's compliance, or if you deal with the military, all across the board. So there's lots of compliance and regulations, and those organizations, not only are they able to invest millions and probably billions if you combine the organizations into their infrastructure, they also have dedicated teams that all they do all day every day is work on and make sure that they meet or exceed the compliance requirements for all these different regulatory compliance that may or may not apply to your organization. And I don't know about you, but I know that Microsoft can probably invest in larger teams than what Mytech can in order to make sure that all this stuff is being maintained. Now we have great teams here, and we're definitely investing in that. But relative to what we even can do together, Microsoft and Google and Amazon are able to invest a lot more. So that's, again, part of the value that you get is teams that not only are responsible for it, but teams that test it and try and hack it and penetrate it proactively to make sure they shore up the gaps. Okay, so now I've got a few specific.
One thing, Nate, real quick. Do you have any specifics regarding compliance? All these different organizations and certifications that you have to follow. Do you have any specifics in differences between what, maybe just specifically regarding Microsoft or a company that we may work with that they're saying that they're doing to make sure that they are protected? Or I'm just kind of curious about any specifics that they're doing.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, in fact, I'll share with those afterwards part of the follow-up email that everyone will receive tomorrow. That'll include a link to the recording, so you can share that. But it'll also include reference content that we reference. So this is one of the. And so I'll include the link from the previous slide, as well as a video that Microsoft has put together which I won't show on this session, but it's about a 4 to 5 minute video, and it actually talks about how Microsoft, for instance, invests in teams of individuals who are responsible for continually updating the systems, right? So one of the benefits of the cloud is that they can, behind the scenes and because of the redundancy they've built in, they can, in a rolling fashion that doesn't affect downtime, they can actually update, whether it's a security patch, it's a bug in the software. So they have teams that are continually making sure that those updates happen. Then the other thing that they're doing, I know you mentioned, or you asked Scott about a specific regulation in particular, and while they do focus and make sure that they hit the different regulations, a lot of the regulations, when you really get down into them, they're very, very similar. You need to keep things secure. You need to keep things encrypted. You need to keep data updated. You need to have a monitoring capabilities. Like, there's a lot of the same kind of requirements across PCI and HIPAA and ITARs and FINRA and SEC, those kind of things. But the way Microsoft executes on that, at least this is what the video illustrates, is they have not only the teams that are responsible for keeping it up to date and responsible for the individual compliance regulations, but they also have teams of people that are proactively trying to attack it. So internally, kind of white hacking, so to speak, or white hat hacking as they call it, where you're trying to, from a technical perspective, try and break the security before hackers break the security. As well as they take the stance and they presume that they've been attacked. They presume that they've been breached. So instead of presuming that they haven't been breached and feeling safe, they actually presume that they have been breached. So they're constantly monitoring and paying attention to the data sets and change data and what's happening and the activity that's going on in the environment and the networks and the systems that they support and manage. So it gets a little technical to answer that question, but basically they have multiple different layers in which they are actively on a regular basis. This is all they do to make sure that they can meet the kind of general security requirements that just any best practice for any organization, but then also the specific security requirements that your unique organization might have if you're subject to HIPAA, FINRA, and PCI, for example, that you can actually plug into all those components. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I know I've been through PCI audits before where you're trying to certify if you have PCI compliance, and if you've ever been through that type of audit or something, it's crazy the types of questions that they're asking. So it's good to know that at least that Microsoft is taking extra measures to be able to make sure that their cloud infrastructure is taken care of. When I'm walking through that PCI compliance checklist, that I'm able to mark the right answers to the questions essentially.
Yeah, and we actually had one of our customers that's in the financial space, so they're subject to FINRA and SEC compliance recently, because we were having a conversation with them about moving their email to O365, for example. So now it's taking it off their local server that's in their physical office and moving it to moving to O365 for email. And one of the questions they asked, well, how secure is it? And I would argue, based on all those things, that I can tell you that while we have believe that we have good security practices, that we are monitoring that, and we are actively patching. In fact, we sent out an email just earlier this week on a patch that Microsoft basically said, you got to apply this patch now because we can't wait till the next month's patch cycle. So we sent a communication out to our customers that were affected by it, and our team is on those kind of things. But our team is nowhere near the size of Microsoft's team as far as its ability to meet and exceed all of these different kinds of regulatory compliance requirements and the due diligence that they're doing on our behalf by just paying for $4 a month for email, right? I mean, it's crazy what $4 a month for an email address will get you. It gets all this stuff too, as opposed to having to pay your own team to do it. So yeah, good question, Scott. And then so from that, just to kind of to quantify the impact. Now I'm going to reference 2015 data, so it's gotten worse since here. So I'm going to ask, since Scott's the only one that can hear, or Stephanie, since you're on the phone, how many threats, can you guess how many threats were discovered in 2015? Or those who are online, if you want to throw a chat out or throw a question out there or comment on that. I'm just curious if any comments that you might get on.
Stephanie, I'm going to defer to you on this one. What do you think? I have no idea. I'm going to ask that.
I would guess 100,000.
So 100,000. I've gotten 50,000 before. I talked to a Chamber of Commerce group earlier this month. I think I got a $250,000, maybe $500,000. There are actually 64 million new threats discovered in 2015, and that's about 2 to 4 per second. Now, for those of you who are aware of, on your phone, you get occasionally, hey, there's a firmware update. Do you want to update? And then your phone has to reboot. Or IT applies an update to your machine, like, hey, there's this thing that has to be updated, and you got to reboot. If your machine, what if your machine had to reboot, or your phone had to reboot every time a new threat was discovered? You wouldn't even be able to use it because of the frequency at which new threats are accumulating and coming out. So one of the challenges that security has is keeping you secure and responding to new threats that come out literally at a pace of more than 2 or 3 a second, and yet being able to do that while keeping you being able to use your systems. So that's one of the things that O365 is able to do, and through layered security is able to do. So this is the problem, the business problem that we all have, is how do we protect ourselves against all these evolving new threats and the rapid pace of new threats while still being able to work. So, and do you really want to have to think about that or worry about that? Probably not. You just want to make it work, right? You just want it to work for your staff. So this link, I'll send out this reference. I think actually this is the link to the video that I was talking about. So I'll actually send that out tomorrow, because I think I remember seeing that this might have just recently changed from Microsoft, just literally in the last few days. So I'll double check that, make sure that the link is accurate. And if it's not this link, it'll be the correct one that'll go out in the email tomorrow.
By the way, Nate, kudos to Ronald. He actually guessed the closest to your number of the amount.
Oh, did he?
So, nice job, Ronald.
Nice work. Yeah, thank you for the comment. That's you were definitely much closer ballpark, and that's probably more accurate. That's probably closer to where it is today as far as the number of new threats that are coming out. Yeah, so nice work on that. That's great. So now we're going to move on to the next section. How should your business leverage the cloud differently? So the reason I've got a couple comments here, like Mytech on Facebook or follow on LinkedIn, we are actually launching in the next several weeks a whole education and awareness campaign around these kind of components, just to raise awareness and make an understanding around the threats that are out there, but the things you can do about it, and little tips and trivia. We're going to be releasing all of those incrementally on Facebook, on our Mytech Facebook and LinkedIn pages. So if you want to plug into some of that content, take an opportunity either now or on your phone or whatever, but just go to Mytech and like us on Facebook or follow us on LinkedIn, and it'll plug you into all that content. So how your business should leverage the cloud differently. So let's dig into that. So I'm going to remind you, today's challenge is, just because we've always done it doesn't mean that that's the way you should always do it. We need to think a little bit differently about how we're going to plug in. So, for example, let's consider the historical way in which we purchased IT. So if you're in the process of saying, hey, I got an old server, I need to replace it, so I need to buy now, and I'm going to try and buy. I don't want to buy too far into the future, but I don't want to buy so that I have to next month have to add resources, or 3 months from now to add more RAM or more disk, because that's going to cost me more money because I have to get my IT team out here and reconfigure it. So I'm going to think about, well, what's the feasible future that I should think into, and I'm going to think 2 to 3 years in the future as far as what I need to buy. So I'm going to forecast into the future. So what I'm going to do is, if I think about how my business operates, I need to buy or invest to the peak. So if I think my system, let's just use just pick a resource. I'm going to use a number of 1,000. It doesn't matter what it is, but let's say that I'm going to use 1,000. I think that my organization over the next 3 years might hit a peak of 1,000, or could be 2, whatever the number is, but pick a number over the next 3 years. Because what I don't want to do is, I don't want to underbuy, because then if I buy 500 and my team needs 1,000, well, now I've limited my team's productivity. But if I buy 1,000 and I don't use 1,000, or maybe that peak isn't reached till 2 years from now. So even if you're right, you've paid too much today because you're buying capacity into the future. Now, if you're wrong, again, you bought the 500 versus 1,000, if that was your peak, now you've actually restricted the productivity of your entire business, well, at least for a period of time, right? So that's the challenge that we've had historically, but that's the reality. That's been the reality of our world. So either way, if you bought too much or bought too little, you can't give those resources back. And then if you add resources 2 years in, now instead of a 4-year or a 5-year amortization cycle as far as depreciation for your business, if it's 2 years in, now you only have a 2 or 3-year depreciation. So you're getting less value of the investment you're making into your infrastructure over time because you're having to guess. And even if you guess right, it puts you in a not necessarily the best financial and resource position because you're paying for more than what you need. So this is a little bit of the challenge that I think the cloud helps us solve. So let's look at well, what is the cloud? What can you think? This is where how do you think about where the cloud can help solve some of these problems? Well, the cloud, you just need to buy what you need today. And let's apply this to multiple different instances. You could, let's say if you're growing, you don't need to buy resources for email for 10 more people than you have today because you think over the next year you're going to add 10 employees. You just pay for the email boxes that you have today, and then when the new employees start, you add another mailbox. Or if you know that you're using 500 today, using the previous example, and that's all you need today, then you buy that. And guess what? If for some reason 6 months from today, you need to take that 500 and move to 700, well, scale it up. Well, let's say your business is seasonal, and that 700 only needs to apply for the months of January through April if you're in the accounting world. And then you can scale back to 500 for the other 8 months of the year. Well, gosh, do I want to have to pay for 700 for 12 months, or would I rather pay for 700 for 4 months? So you can scale up or scale down. The same thing applies with email. So let's say you do add some folks, and you know what? One of our customers that we've been working with just recently sold off a part of their business. Well, they kind of split the business into two pieces to focus on their core. Well, if you use the cloud, you don't have to like lose an investment that you previously made because you're not going to be able to take a server and physically break it into pieces to give it to company A versus company B. So business changes will enable you. The cloud will enable you to scale up or scale down based on the business changes. There's also things that you can do with the cloud, which is great. So imagine that. So you hit. Let's say you bought this server. Going to the previous example, you bought something and it's got the resources of 500, and you start hitting this cap, this threshold. You hit the $500 ceiling. That's $500. The 500 ceiling. Well, then you have to consider. All right. Well, now I need to buy more. So let's figure out what I need to buy, and then I need to have someone. Then we need to order it, receive it, schedule some downtime to get it installed. Then we're going to install it, and then we're going to be back in production. And now we were able to exceed the 500 threshold. Well, in the cloud, you can actually, in many instances, automate the scaling up and scaling down of resources. So, for instance, if you hit a threshold, you can build rules that say, hey, if I hit this threshold for a period of time, I want you to add X amount of resource automatically, so that my team is not being inhibited, or my team's productivity is not being slowed down because I'm hitting this arbitrary threshold that we've just said that this is based on what we needed at the time. And then you can also then scale down so that if you go below a certain threshold over a period of time, you can actually build a rule to say, okay, scale back those resources so I'm not paying for it. Many cloud infrastructure environments are paid by the minute or the hour of use. So if you actually, for example, can scale up during production, scale down during the evenings if you don't have evening use, you can actually then, instead of buying for what you need for 3 years of time, you can scale up and scale down dynamically and only pay for exactly what your organization is using, day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year. So that's one of the things the cloud can do for you as well. Either way, the beauty of the cloud is that you don't own that risk. You can give back those resources. If you scale up to 700 and then scale back to 500, you don't have to worry about the delta of 200. That's not your problem. That's Microsoft's or Amazon's or CenturyLink's problem. They own that. They own that scale. So that's the benefit of you just being able to plug into it. It's like when you ride the bus, or if you take an Uber, you don't have to worry about what they do with their car, where it was maintained, where it was stored, where they parked, where they got tickets, whatever. You just plug into it when you need it and give it back when you don't. Same kind of opportunities that you have with the cloud. Scott, any thoughts or comments or questions on that?
No, you did a good job of explaining that.
All right, so that's how I want you to think differently about the cloud. So let's look at this. So that's kind of an infrastructure as a service example. Let's talk about software or the application as a service. And we need to speed up here because we're running out of time. So how many of you probably use like an online banking, or you have you have an app that you use on your phone? I bet you probably don't care or wonder whether or not where US Bank or Wells Fargo or whatever bank you use, where their systems reside. You just want to click on the app and log into your account and it works, right? Same thing with Facebook or LinkedIn. You probably don't really care where that stuff exists. You just want to click on the app and you want it to work. Well, the same thing should apply to, Office. And so Microsoft has really moved its applications so where that you can have them on premise, but you can also just have them subscribed to in the cloud. That can apply to Exchange, SharePoint, few or less used, a Publisher or Access, and definitely Skype. It's just where you can just plug in and you don't have to worry about where those servers exist, how it gets there. All you need to know is you click on that application and it works. So that's really what we're talking about as far as application as a service. You don't have to think about how many servers they have, any of that stuff. You just plug into the application and it works. So one of the things that we talk about is thinking about, okay, well, is my organization ready for the cloud? Is this something that makes sense for me to move to the cloud? So some of the catalysts that we've seen, and we'll hand out one of the things that we'll deliver to folks who attended is a cloud readiness kind of questionnaire, or it's kind of a checklist / questionnaire, things to ask yourself as far as that could be indicators for cloud readiness. And we're actually building this into a new web page where you can kind of do a self-assessment to kind of see where you're at from a cloud perspective. But has there been a change in key software applications? For example, as I mentioned earlier, if you have an electronic medical record system that's on premise and they have an option that goes to the cloud, that's oftentimes a good time to consider a move. If you have old infrastructure, well, at the very least, if you have old infrastructure, you should consider the cloud and weigh the options. And maybe there's pieces that you want to keep as infrastructure in your facility, and things that you might say, hey, this makes sense for this to move to the cloud. Those are key catalyst times. If your workforce is more mobile, works from home more, works from the field more, oftentimes when you don't want to have to depend on a physical office with a physical internet connection, and you can rely on the internet connection at any given coffee shop down the road, and everyone can still be productive. That's a good catalyst to think about how the cloud can benefit you. If you do want to move your business from a traditional CapEx model to an OpEx model, that's definitely one of the catalysts to consider. That cloud will fit that model very well. And really, if you're just looking for the increased reliability and security and availability of your systems, which we hear a lot from our customers, I just want it to function. I want to plug in and it just works. The cloud, that is the promise of IT, especially the promise of cloud, that are, if you're really desiring that, or if you don't feel like you have enough of that in your business today, those are some key questions or catalysts to think about.
Hey, Nate, if you can briefly just touch on what you view as old infrastructure. What is that defined as in the ever-changing world of technology?
Scott, I tell you, you were doing a good job. And again, I don't know if you did this intentionally or if because you saw the slide deck beforehand, or if you just did it as a good segue, because that's exactly the next section we're going to talk about. Is actually, what are the top 10?
The first one, I actually knew the next slide. This one actually was genuine. I didn't know the next slide. So yeah, awesome.
That's good. So yeah, this is one of the components that I think is some of that conflict that we've talked about. Is that, yeah, the cloud's great, but you still need a laptop or a desktop or a firewall or a switch. You still need ways to connect to the cloud, to access your technology. So we put together top 10 best practices for infrastructure and systems you may still need. And if you're so inclined from a social media perspective, go ahead and if you think about something or you want to post something, tag Mytech at Mytech, or tag myself on LinkedIn or Facebook. We'll share that as well. It's always good to get some trivia and tips out there. So we broke it down into different sections. The kind of the network and the power, some of the kind of key, typically the stuff that's behind the scenes in a closet that has blinky lights and you're not really sure what it is. So for us, our best practices are these manufacturers, from a firewall perspective, less than 5 years old, and security subscription needs to be current. These are some of the key best practices that if you don't do these things, in fact, the WannaCry outbreak that happened, our firewalls, the SonicWall firewalls in particular, they were protecting people within hours of that threat coming out automatically. So that's what the security subscription does for you, is that your technology can protect you from yourself. That's one of the ways that we're able to combat the 2 to 3 new threats a second or more, is because keeping those security subscriptions current. Physical switch, because you know what, if a switch dies, guess what, everything's down. So Dell, Cisco, HP, some major manufacturers basically. Switches, you can usually run them a little longer, but once it gets over the 5-year mark, we definitely recommend considering replacement, but we really want them less than 7 years old. We want them to be at the speeds of 100 or 1,000 or higher, or 1,000 or higher, and just that they have the ability to be managed remotely, so that we can actually get alerts from them and actually help troubleshoot network issues. Wireless access points, again, similar major manufacturer, less than 5 years old, and they need to have the same access to be managed remotely. So you're seeing a trend here of timeline is key, as well as the ability to access them or manage them. Again, uninterruptible power supply. If your UPS battery dies, oftentimes your systems will go down too. So it's important to keep these current, less than 5 years old, and that network card is a common piece that's overlooked, but that network card basically allows us, or your IT provider, to pay attention to what's going on with the battery, and then we can proactively and preempt battery from failing, because we can get alerts that hey, the battery is running out of juice. So, but if you abide by these things from a section in this section, you're mitigating the risk of any kind of outages that are going to cause major productivity downtime. So the next section is really servers and storage. Again, we want a major manufacturer, less than 5 years old, and if it's in production, keep it under warranty. Because one of the things that these manufacturers are not required to keep equipment around for you if you don't have a warranty. So if you have a server that's out of warranty and one of your hard drives fails and you want to go to them to get a replacement, they don't have to give it to you. They have to give it to people that have a warranty. They don't have to give it to people who don't. So this can actually mitigate and make sure that you get that quickly so that it doesn't impact your organization from a productivity perspective. Finally, the last not the last section, but the second to last section is around operating systems and applications. Really, from an operating system perspective and some of the key components of your infrastructure and even your line of business application is that it needs to be a supported version. This is the biggest thing across the board, is being a supported version. If Microsoft is not going to support it, if VMware is not going to support it, it's going to be really difficult, if not impossible, for Mytech or any other IT provider to support it. And finally, around the line of business applications, same as far as the supported version from a manufacturer, but if you don't have a support and maintenance agreement with that provider, as far as keeping your software up to date and current and moving forward, and you don't have the ability to call them if there's a problem with the application, you're running the risk of actually having a problem that causes a major downtime with your organization, because they're not going to help you unless you have that agreement. So that's one of the things that we strongly recommend.
We've got a
and finally, the endpoint.
Oh yeah, sure, go ahead. You can finish the endpoints slide, and then we do have a question surrounding costs from an attendee. So if you wouldn't mind,
perfect.
Going back to me after this slide.
Great, no problem. And we'll probably run just a few minutes long, so bear with us here. But thank you very much for everyone who's attending. So the last section here is around just the endpoints, because I'll tell you, one of the most critical components to enable employee productivity is the device that your employees use all day, every day. Keep it current, keep it good, less than 5 years old. We do recommend having a warranty for at least 3 years, but we definitely are not, it's not a requirement to extend the warranty for the life of the device. But really keep it a major manufacturer, less than 5 years old. There's actually data out there that suggests that where a computer starts costing you more in downtime and support than buying a new one is around the 4-year mark. To say where actually after the 4th year, it actually costs you more from a support and downtime perspective than it would to buy a new machine to enable your employee to be more productive. So just some tips and trivia around that. So before we move on, where financial is the next piece, and it's actually only a couple slides. So what's the question, Scott, that you mentioned?
Question from one of the attendees is the cloud more, less, or the same cost as being on-premise?
That is a great question. The cloud should not be considered, in general, a cost-saving measure, because at best it's a wash. As far as some of the systems, like infrastructure as a service, for example, you are going to pay consistently, right? But you're only going to pay for what you use. So that's one of the ways why you have to leverage the cloud differently, is because if you consider it the same way you've been considering it, you're going to pay for too much. So that's part of the problem. The other thing is analysis around like email, for example. Buying an Exchange server, installing an Exchange server, managing an Exchange server, backing up an Exchange server. It is cheaper to use O365 for email than to buy it, manage it, and maintain it, and back it up and secure it yourself. It's cheaper. So in that regard, it is cheaper for that. And some applications as a service are cheaper because you don't have to buy the infrastructure, maintain the infrastructure, back up the infrastructure. So you're just kind of taking all that off your plate. So in general, from just a strategy perspective and thinking about the high level of budget, think of it, if you think about it as a wash, it shouldn't be that different from an expense. You're just converting it from a one-time upfront to an overtime expense. But the thing is that expense never goes away, but you're only paying for what you need, and you can scale up and scale down very easily. So it's a complicated question to answer, but hopefully that makes sense. It's interesting. So there's another follow-up question on that. So let me finish up the slides, and we'll follow up with you individually, or see if we can stay online and answer that at the end. But let's just get, for the sake of everyone else that's online, let's go through this financial conflict. And Make IT EaaSy top 10 list, and use the hashtag if you're so inclined to share that. So all right, so think about some of the things that you pay for monthly today. You're already paying for all these things on a monthly basis. No, we might not be paying for Netflix on a monthly basis. I get that, or Hulu, but you get the idea. We're getting to this mode. We're already paying for things on a monthly basis. We already pay for a lot of things on a monthly basis. But there's sometimes people will build furniture, pay it up front, or buy it as a lease, especially office furniture. You're oftentimes paying laptops, desktops, servers. You're typically buying that up front. But this is a depreciating asset, right? Even furniture. Looking at it from a standpoint of a rental, because you know what? By the time you've depreciated the asset, it's time to get something new anyway, right? Because there's no value in a 4 or 5 year old Switch. Really isn't. There's no value in a 4 or 5 year old laptop. So like keeping it around is actually costing you more money because of the employee productivity hit and the potential downtime and support that you might have to deal with. So think about it that way. There's this conflict that's happening. So there's things that you're already paying for a lot of an operational expense today. Your internet connection. You don't buy your internet connection. You subscribe to your internet connection, right? It's just a lot of your heat and utilities. You're already paying for that on a monthly basis based on what you used. So the same kind of concept applies from an IT perspective. Is how can we just make it everything as a service, whether it's your infrastructure, whether it's your cloud, because it just needs to be kept current and relative, all in the same band of time to make it work. So these are the things we covered today. Kind of hit that financial conflict. And when one of the last comments I'll make around the financial conflict is that I actually was having a conversation with one of our new customers that just came on board recently, and it was the CFO of a large nonprofit. And I asked him this question candidly. I'm like, how are you as a CFO of a nonprofit that I know has board requirements and budgeting requirements that you have to submit? How is this working for you? And he said, for me as a CFO, it makes, no pun intended, it makes it easier for me to have an operational expense because it's something that I can budget and I just know is there, and I don't have to go through several layers of approval to submit a capital expense to do a project, every 3 or 4 years or every 5 years, whatever that is. He's like, it's way easier for me to just budget it as an ongoing known operating expense as a CFO of a large nonprofit. I thought that was an interesting response. That was not what I was expecting, but that was a response I got from that CFO. So with that said, I do want to follow up with the person, the attendee who asked another question, follow up, because I think there's a more detailed conversation that we should have. But I do want to thank you all for attending the Mytech U June of 2017. Our goal, we want to make IT easy. We all have more important things to do than worry about whether or not IT is going to work, but we're here to help you through that. So by all means, contact myself or Scott. If you share something, go ahead and tag Make IT EaaSy, and reach out if there's anything we can do to be of service. Any final comments, Scott?
No, thanks for including me. Appreciate it, Nate.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody, and we'll sign off for now, and you'll get an email tomorrow with follow-up with the link to the recording as well as some of the references that we mentioned in the session today. Have a great day, everyone.